Some of the most wild and difficult piano pieces have been written by Frédéric Chopin, perhaps one of the pinnacle composers of the Romantic era. Chopin is one of those composers we look at and we think, wow, that's hard. I mean, he wrote stuff like this. And this. Yet some people feel that just because his simpler pieces like his preludes have less notes in them, that they are somehow easier to play than you might think. However, having studied most of the preludes myself, including using 6 of them in this year's Chopin competition audition, I can confidently tell you that these pieces are wildly misunderstood and often much harder than meets the eye. So let's look at why Chopin's E minor prelude is actually more difficult than the page suggests. But first, we really need to look at what makes it accessible, because this is where the misunderstanding comes from. At first glance, there's a lot of things that make it approachable for a beginner or intermediate player. For example, it's 1 page long, only 25 measures in length. There are a lot of repeated chords, which makes it easy to sort of understand that there aren't too many things to figure out. Most of the rhythms are quite simple. For example, we have a dotted half in the beginning and a quarter, which are rhythms we could learn as a total beginner even. And the left hand provides a very steady beat with its constant eighth notes. So the only real rhythm challenges are the 2 against 3 and the going back between 2 eighth notes and 3 eighth notes we see in bar 12, for instance. The 2 against 3 is in bar 18. A lot of students have trouble with that. Then we have a little bit of challenge with just the physical leap in measure 17 of the octave to the full chords. And so on and so forth. Outside of that, admittedly, the actual notes themselves are not that hard to play. Because basically, if you take it in small chunks, let's say 1 or 2 measures a day, and you pay attention to just the notes that change, you can learn these patterns really quickly. For example, measure 1 to measure 2. There's 8 of the same chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we get a change on the next measure. There's 4 of those. 4 of those. Now there's 4 again. And now we have 2 and 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, and 4 and 2 and 2, and so on and so forth. So you're not actually learning that many progressions. And beyond that, it's not just changes every 4 or 8 or 2. It's even less than that, because there are 3 notes in every chord. And if we look at the first to the second change, we have only 2 of the 3 are changing. The E on the top thumb is carried over. We don't physically hold it, but it's played again, so we don't have to move that part of the hand. And then from the middle of that beat to the next change, it's only the thumb that changes down. The bottom 2 notes of it are not changed. Again, this is not terribly hard, neither is the fingering of the right hand. For the most part, it's in about 3 hand positions, with the major exception being measure 16. With that going all over the place in both hands, at least relative to the difficulty level of this piece. Okay, so that's the easy stuff. Now let's look at what truly makes it difficult. Most people ignore the fact that it is in cut time, which really means that we're meant to hear this in 2 pulses, not in 4 beats, which most people try to sort of hear it in, which is like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... This is why it's often played too slowly, because though it means largo, which is like large and expanded, that it would imply a slow tempo, but by writing a cut time, he also suggests that it needs to have momentum and phrase structure behind it, which kind of can't be heard until you start to push it to a higher speed. So, challenge number 1, keep the line moving, not getting stuck. Most people drop the melody, and though it's beautiful just on its own, It also kind of gets boring after a while if you do this too slowly. Not saying it's not fun to listen to that way, though I don't think that's the ideal performance. I think Chopin intended you to truly hear groups of two in which it's every 4 notes. Pulse, pulse, pulse. Now that's the real challenge, is to show the pulse without just accenting it, because this doesn't sound great. See, that's aggressive and interrupting the phrase. You have to kind of feel that, but not actually do it in your performance of it. That's a pretty difficult line to ride. Similarly, we have what's called voicing. So, actually, I should talk about balance first. Balance is just the idea that one hand or one part of the hand is louder than any other part in the piece. So we have a right hand, which is espressivo, and this is simply to be expressive. What is that supposed to mean? Well, it has to emote something, right? Usually expressive with the timing, meaning we're not keeping a strict beat. We're using the beat as the overall feel, but because we're hearing it in pulses, we can kind of push and pull within that. So you might have 1, 2, 1, 2, and some get faster and some get slower within that. And then on, and then slower. See, so we're pushing and pulling the time, which we would call rubato. Liszt described it, a contemporary of Chopin, like a tree in the wind. The roots never change, but it can be sort of blown to the left or to the right, depending on how heavy the wind is and which direction it's going. So we both get faster and slower. We don't just slow down. But this is actually related to the voicing, because if we don't have the right speed, it can be really hard to get the right layers of sound. You may think, well, one is sound and one is speed, so how are they related? But if I play this slowly, it's very hard to get the melody to project over that, because the piano tone dies away. It gets quieter and quieter. You cannot continue the sound louder than how you started it, unlike a violin or a voice that could do that, right? So if we play this slowly, the melody is gone by the 4th or 5th note. You can hardly hear it, especially when you're hearing 3 other notes on top of it. So this is another reason to play it faster, so that you can hear the melody projecting. We certainly want to hear the actual tune and not just the chords in the way. So that's a challenge, to play the right hand louder, but also to play the left hand quieter, because really you could scream this out and it's still going to get shadowed by the left hand if you don't keep this under control. So we're going to be expressive with our timing to create this sound. We're going to go a little bit faster so that we can get the right pulse. And we have to play incredibly quiet with the left hand. Okay, another thing that makes this quite difficult is not just playing quiet, but actually getting the notes to line up in sync. Many beginning students, even intermediate level, often have this challenge where 2 or 3 of your notes don't actually play at the same time. Like this, you get a group, these 2, maybe together, and then the 3rd one right after it. Or all sorts of kind of mushy sounds. Very hard to actually line that up. You know what did it for me is when I studied Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata. Which you might think it's 100 levels harder than this. And in some ways it is, but fundamentally it's actually the same ability to just play a chord over and over, very quietly, very controlled, and have all the notes line up. So in some ways this is just as difficult as the Waldstein, it's just not as fast. In any case, we go back to this. That's a fairly immense challenge. Now I will say, in order to overcome this, the best thing to do is to actually get all the keys to the bottom, even if they're not in sync, and slowly release all of them together, where you feel the key travel coming up. Because what this does is causes your hand to be nice and firm, but not tense. So you get the firmness required to have a consistent sound. and you really learn the up weight of the key as well as the down weight. I always find that learning opposites is a great way to mastery. So if you get the up travel, your down travel is going to automatically be a lot better. Okay, I've been struggling with a cough, so I suppose that helps you play the piece as well, given Chopin's tuberculosis. But in any case, now, another thing we haven't even explored at all is the pedaling, which I have been using, but that's a beast in and of itself. It may seem as simple as change the pedal when you have a harmony change, and I wish it were. But that's not that simple, especially in measures like 9, where if you just change with the left hand, does it sound bad? It kind of depends on who you ask. I would say not necessarily, but it could definitely be improved or more nuanced. Because the right hand in one pedal, it gets a little watery and washy to the point where it doesn't sound like it's being sung. And forgive me, I've never had a voice lesson in my life. We hear the singularity of each note, each moment as it happens. With the pedal, we don't hear that. We hear this big wash of sound. So you would want to change the pedal at least every 2, maybe 3 notes. And certainly on the harmony changes. At the same time, if we change immediately, it's too clean. Here would be an example of changing on every note, and it almost sounds dry. Even though I was pedaling on every 8th note, it still didn't feel right. So sometimes you actually want to blend it a little bit with taste so you get this almost orchestral violin-like sound. You know, if you listen to the strings of an orchestra, they don't sound clean. Like, they'll often sound a little bit mushy, and it's not because they have bad technique, it's because that's the nature of those instruments. They're not percussion, so the sound sort of blooms after it's made. Whereas a piano, it's active right away. That's to our disadvantage when we're playing something like this that is melodic in nature, like a melody that you would sing. So if I change the pedal, it sounds percussive. If I delay the pedal a little bit after I actually want to change it, but not so much later that it's the next note, then I get this perfect blend and this hazy kind of song-like, violin string-like color. And then, okay, on top of this, now we have not just the frequency, but the depth. If I pedal all the way down, here's what it would sound like in measure 17, for instance, even if I change it correctly. Now, it's not always advisable to go to the bottom, because listen to this. It's a lot of sound. And maybe that works there because it's the climax of the piece. But you don't always want that. Sometimes you just want a little bit. See, listen, I'm going to play this and I'm going to slightly release the pedal as you hear it. The sound of that B is going to fundamentally change. Right? And that's moving rather rapidly. So if I, for example, just pedal a third of the way down, that's an interesting effect. I still get the fullness, but listen to this. It's kind of half there. So I can actually hammer away at the melody all the more without having to soak it from the left hand, where you can barely hear the melody. So it's not just how loud you're playing with your dynamics, it's also the different shades of color, the different amounts of pedal, the different sounds. You know, when, again, to use the orchestra analogy, Chopin, of course, was a fundamentally piano composer, but that's not to say we can't imagine an orchestra doing this, where it would be maybe like a section of cellos. Well, actually, it's a note below the cello's lowest note, so maybe that's cello and bass, right? But they're not going to hammer that out. They're going to hold it. It's going to be warm and rich and sustained. And then these chords might be, let's say, viola and violin. Again, with a little bit of blend on purpose. And then the melody would probably be something much more aggressive. Maybe a very exciting clarinet or a softer oboe. That's certainly not a flute, right? It's got a punch to it, but that sings when you get the right layers of the sound and the pedal. See, so those are the big three things, the pedaling, the timing, and the balance between the hands. Now there's one more super subtle thing. This is the most advanced idea of the whole piece in the interpretation, and that is that our ear gravitates toward the top note of things, and that's not always a good thing. So if I play all these chords, and so on, I kind of naturally hear the top whenever it goes. But the top isn't always what's interesting. Chopin writes this in such a way where the chromaticism, where we have one key moving at a time, is not always put on the top. So though our ear wants to hear the top naturally, sometimes the top is just the same. And it's just not that interesting to listen to. The interesting part is what moves, because our ear wants to hear what moves, because that's the actual change and the variety for our pleasure. But we don't often hear it because most pianists don't voice it. So let me kind of show you what I would do, or at least I would experiment and play around with to incorporate yet another level of depth into this interpretation. If we look at the changes only, the notes that actually move from chord to chord, not stay the same, then we get in the end of measure 1 here, it's the G and the B to the F sharp and the A. Then the next change, it's the E to the E flat. Next change is the F sharp in the bottom, down to the F natural, and then finally the E flat, down to the D, and the A to the G sharp. And then finally the F to the E. See, it's bouncing between on top, on bottom, and somewhere in the middle all the time, and there's not a particular order to it. That's what makes it so cool. It's not a melody in and of itself, nor should you treat it like that. But if you add this in as a little bit of texture, it supports the melody in a better way because you actually hear the harmony more when you hear the changes more. So here's my interpretation of the piece, adding all these pieces together. That's the pedaling, the voicing, the expressive detail, pretty much everything you could possibly imagine. And by the way, I don't even officially play this piece. This is just something I kind of play around with a lot and I think about. So I'm not wanting this to feel like a final version. I have a point about that at the end, about how Chopin played with great variety and spontaneity and different every time. But before, let's just give it a shot. If you want to skip ahead, I'll put a timestamp of when my performance is over, because I do have a little bit more teaching tutorial after this. So here we go. All right, so again, to talk about the variety of the piece, Chopin was said to have played many of his pieces multiple times back to back, to even to such a degree that people did not recognize he was playing the same piece again until like halfway through the piece, or at least a couple minutes in, which suggests wildly different tempos, different pedaling, completely different expression, maybe different articulation. Like sometimes I think we just take these things too literally, and I'm seeing more and more in this modern generation a generation of copycats, where there's this sort of perceived standard of excellence that is supposed to be this way, this tempo, this clean amount of phrasing. I mean, frankly, even this year in the Chopin competition, I'm not going to name names. I'm not here to like deny the hard work all these people are doing, because I applied myself. I know how freaking hard it is. I didn't get in. And yet, I'm honestly quite bored with a lot of the playing, because when you hear the same waltz in the same timing, with the same articulation, in the same pep in its step, it's kind of like, is that really all that's in the piece? Isn't there a different timing, a different rubato, an entirely different way of sort of shaping? Like, you know, it doesn't have to be clean every time. Why not like be a little bit more daring, you know? Like, it seems like people are too afraid to like go a little bit extra or do too much rubato or express themselves. It gets to such a level where there's a lot of just careful playing, and it kind of bothers me, because it's like there's so much more in this music, and the best art, I do not believe, is careful. And I don't mean rambunctious and wild and just like random accents. Like there's a level where it's too much, of course. But the way I think you balance all this out is the fundamental system I always talk about, which is simply breaking down piano playing into 12 categories, the 12 fundamentals you see right here. And there are 12 different skills that all have a bearing on how you finish your interpretation. It's not just, I feel like taking more time here. Everything works together. So individually, you study your fingering, your pitches, your harmonies, your pedaling, the phrase structure, the inflection, the dynamics. You do your proper study of all those things on their own, and then you merge it all together to see the bigger picture. And that allows you to say, I can take rubato here because the phrase structure allows for it, or even asks for it. Even though Chopin didn't write it, it just is begging, because the third measure of this phrase is leading to the climax. I have to do something with that. And you just look at the music different. I think a lot of people today are afraid to do anything that's not directly written on the page. Or we have a generation of people who don't care about the page at all, and then they just do whatever they want, whenever they want. And I'd kind of rather hear that than not, but at the same time, I want it to respect what's on the page. Remember that the page, the notation here is binary. It's not the full sound. It's a visual picture. Accents, diminuendos, hairpins, do they mean expression? Yes. Do they mean timing? Maybe. Do they mean dynamics? Maybe. But even there, how much? How much diminuendo? How much ritardando? And then everything combines together. It's smorzando at the end of this prelude, which is dying away. But how much? Is it the time and the dynamics? And then, of course, the pedal. I took a lot of time here. Certainly dying away. Some people would say, well, dying away is just getting a little quieter. And they'd keep it in time. And that's still dying away. But I don't see these extremes very often. And the generation of old had this in spades. Hoffman, Rachmaninoff, Gieseking, Cortot, you would never listen to one of them and think you were hearing the other. You knew right away if you heard some of their playing before. This is a Hoffman nocturne. This is Rachmaninoff himself playing Chopin. They all had their character that they put into their piece, or their signature on their card, so to speak. So I want to recommend all of you, find your own artistic voice. Don't sit there and just think, oh, the piece isn't that hard, there's not that many notes. No, explore it. Explore its very depths, every element about it. And if you're not really sure where to start, you should get my free piano guide. Even if you do know where to start, it's free. It's in the description. It breaks down all the 12 fundamentals, how this system works, and how you can become your own artist. It's already helped over 2,000 people in 2025 alone. It gets like 5 to 10 downloads a day, and I'd love to have you be one of the next ones. Additionally, I have a personal mentorship club, the Key Learners Piano Club, on school.com, where I run and host support calls, and I have video trainings and a whole classroom and everything where we talk about this exactly all the time. How to build this awareness of interpretation in your own playing, how to structure your practice time, how to improve your technique. All elements of piano playing are in that group. There's just ridiculous growth that people are making on a daily basis even, because I'm in there every day giving feedback, and it's been awesome to see. So if you want to be part of that, you can try it for free before committing, see what's on the inside, and let me know if you have any questions. So in any case, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.